Hi, I'm Brent Ozar, and I'd like to welcome you to the community keynote at the Past Data Community Summit. This is one of my favorite times of year. I've been working in the database community for over 20 years, and I've met so many awesome people in what we call the SQL family, the community of people who work with the Microsoft database stack. I have so many great memories of every year getting together in different cities and talking like it's a family reunion with all the people that I know and love. Obviously, it's tougher during a time like this when we're all making sacrifices. And at moments like this, I stop and think about some of the people that we've lost along the way. Over the last couple of years has been tough on the community. I know that personally, I think a lot about the loss of Gareth Swanepoel, a great friend of mine from the Florida database community. And at moments like this, I really just want to thank everyone for the sacrifices that they've made in trying to keep their society healthy, trying to keep their friends and family safe. I really wish I could be there in person to hug every one of you. I can't wait to see you again. Well, most of you. Now, I'm totally a hugger, and I guess that's one of the skills that I'm going to have to unlearn when we get back together and we start doing conferences again. Now, when Redgate asked me to do the community summit, I thought, well, how can I make this as much like the community events that we usually know and love? Obviously, I can't order pizza for every single one of you, but I thought, how can I make it as personal as possible and make it remind us of the days when we could all get together inside the same room, inside the same bars, inside the same karaoke venue. And I thought, well, let's come into my house instead of doing a boring, not necessarily boring, but session where I'm just sitting in front of a slide deck. And I thought, why don't we have an open conversation? The kind of conversation that I have all the time with data professionals all over the world, especially in this day and age when there's so much uncertainty. When I talk to data professionals, there's one question that I get over and over again. What's going to happen to my job? Even before COVID-19, people were worried about the constant changes with the cloud coming. People read all kinds of articles about, you're being told that everything's about to change and that maybe you're going to become a dinosaur or that you have to relearn everything from scratch. And I thought I'd put together and have a conversation with you about 5 ways that the cloud does impact your career. Impact is probably a bad choice of words to use when I think about dinosaurs and meteors or asteroids, but 5 ways that the cloud impacts your career and what you can do about that, how you can make sure that you have a safe, secure career going forward, not just your job, the thing that you're doing today, but your career long-term going forward. The reason that the cloud really caught on is that we suck at capacity planning. We do a really bad job at estimating how much compute power we're going to need, how much space we're going to need. It's 2021, and I still see people all the time going, I've run out of drive space on my server. Can someone help me? Or people are surprised because they have an error message because they run out of drive space. This is 2021. I've been working with SQL Server for over 20 years. We were struggling with that problem back in like 1999. It's kind of stunning that we as professionals haven't figured out how to automatically manage this stuff. That's just space, let alone CPU and memory and licensing and network throughput and latches and locking. There are so many things that we really suck at capacity planning for. And the way that we worked around it as data professionals is that when management would come to us and they would ask us, how much do we need? And it didn't even matter what we were asking for, whether it was storage space or CPU power or memory. They would say, how much do you need? And we would say, all of it. Even in the year 2021, there is no good way for us to predict how much memory a SQL Server workload is going to need, or Azure SQL DB or Cosmos DB. There's no way I can point at a workload and accurately predict how much memory it's going to need. We've been doing this for 20 years, And we would say things like, we need total storage redundancy. We got to make sure that if we don't have any single points of failure, that if there's any one piece of the infrastructure that could possibly break, we got to fix that so that part of the infrastructure couldn't possibly break. And it never occurred to us to say that there was something wrong about us, that there was something wrong about the way that we were building this stuff. Because what we were essentially telling management was, we need the best infrastructure money can buy because our platform can't tolerate any failures. If you think about it in terms of a condo, like we're here in my condo, if you think about it in terms of a condo, it would be kind of like saying, well, I need 2 bathrooms because just in case one toilet gets plugged up, then I need another toilet that's always ready to go at all times. And I need to multiply that times the number of people in the house. If I have 4 people over, they might need to all go to the bathroom at the same time, and they may plug all 4 of their toilets. So we need another 4 toilets totally ready to go. You would never work like that in real life, and of course, you would look at the food that you're serving and start to wonder how come people are plugging up so many toilets, or maybe it's your choice of friends, or maybe you shouldn't be using bath towels as toilet paper. But management kept looking at us making these unrealistic demands, and management kept looking at our server workloads, and they kept seeing things like 5% CPU utilization or 10% CPU utilization. Or the question that I would get all the time on the blog, why is SQL Server using 100% of the RAM? Why are we using like all the RAM that's available on the box? And I had to explain to people that that's by design. Whatever memory you give to the server, SQL Server will use all of it because it wants to try to cache as much as it possibly can in memory, and it'll never actually let go. And then things like VMware would report on how much of that memory was actively getting used at any time, and it would give screwball low metrics like saying we're only using 5% or 10% of our memory. So we sucked at capacity planning, and we ended up over-provisioning everything, costing way too much money. Of course, SQL Server licensed by the CPU core. We would ask for all of the cores. They would sit around idle. And we would wonder why everybody in the financial arm of our companies hated our guts. We would also wonder why they didn't like the fact that when we were doing our job right, it looked like we weren't doing anything because the server would be fine. It wouldn't be going down at all. We would have built in so much redundancy inside the platform that the thing would never go down, and then they would think that we're useless because who needs database people when the database never goes down? Who needs performance tuners when the thing's only using like 5% of its capacity? The cloud caught on because of the idea of you can pay for just what you use and you can scale to whatever size you want at any time. Look, I'm not saying that either of those is true. I'm not saying that it's true that you only pay for what you use. That's not necessarily the case. You can still over-provision up in the cloud just as easily as you could down on premises. And B, I'm not saying you can scale limitlessly. If you've read my blog posts in the past, you kind of understand how we have built-in limitations on whatever cloud provider that you choose. There are things that some are documented, some are not documented, but don't have limitless scale, especially not instantly scale. So the first thing that you have to be aware of when we talk about the ways that the cloud impacts your career is that the cloud is here because we suck at capacity planning. The cloud is not going to fix that. The cloud is just going to let us buy our way out of that. So if you sucked at capacity planning and all of a sudden you needed 100% resource utilization, or all of a sudden you needed 10 terabytes worth of space that you didn't need before, that's still a problem for you up in the cloud. It's just that now it's a problem for your wallet. Instead of the thing sitting around idle, you're actually going to have to pay for what you use. But if on the other hand, like most people, you over-provisioned. You said, I want a bathroom for every person in my house, ×2 redundancy. If you were the kind of person who over-provisioned, as most data professionals were, then you'll end up saving money because you're not actually using all of those sweet, sweet resources that you were paying for. I am not saying that you need to get good at capacity management and capacity planning if you go to the cloud. You either have to get good at capacity planning so that you can accurately predict budgets, because boy, people get pissed off when they get surprised that suddenly the cloud bill is $100 grand more than they expected it to be each month. You either have to get good at capacity planning, which based on history, none of us are going to get good at, or you have to choose a platform that gives you the flexibility by doing some of that capacity planning and reaction to it for you instead of you doing it. Let's think about that in terms of a hotel. I don't have limitless space for guests. I would certainly love to have all of y'all over this year and say, let's do the past Data Community Summit over at my condo and host the keynote inside here. Keynote, that was a Freudian slip there. Host the keynote inside of here, but obviously I've only got a couple of bedrooms, and if I want to have more people stay over, whether it's my friends or my family, I don't have enough space for them. One of them is the bedroom, the other bedroom that is here is for my office, and I don't have enough space for a bed in there because I have all kinds of camera gear. So how do I react when capacity problems strike? I could put a couple of people on the sofa, like if, depending on how intimate they were, or that's probably the wrong word to use as well, depending on whether they were a couple or whether it was just one person, I might be able to cram somebody in here on the couch. But odds are, I'm going to go to a bedroom as a service provider. I'm going to go get them a room at a hotel. And when they go to a hotel, that hotel has all kinds of services available for people who need to burst temporarily in terms of capacity. When you're not very good at capacity planning, you can simply point your friends over towards the hotel, and it doesn't matter whether you only need one room for one night or one room for 100 nights. Like if I have suddenly a need for one of my relatives to come stay nearby for a long period of time, or 100 rooms for one night. Generally speaking, hotels can absorb a great amount of capacity quickly. And then it doesn't matter if I'm good at capacity planning or not, because I can still stick with just a 2-bedroom condo and call it a day. When you send people over to a hotel or send parts of your application over to a cloud provider, what happens in the hotel is a little bit different than what happens inside your condo. Because, for example, I have a coffee maker. There's a coffee maker here in my condo, but people aren't going to round trip back and forth every time that they want a coffee. The people are going to go use coffee as a service. They're going to use housekeeping as a service, dry cleaning as a service, a pool as a service. There are all kinds of services that they can use over at the hotel. Some of them are free and built in, like the pool. Some of them are free, but they're kind of crappy, like the hotel room coffee maker is usually just, oh, what is it about hotel room coffee that just tastes like they're taking something directly out of the toilet and grinding it up into the coffee maker, and then you push a button and you get boiled poop. Or if you want higher quality stuff, you can go out and go get yourself coffee as a service from somewhere. You can go pay extra. And just like the hotel, coffee as a service then lets you choose between lots of different vendors and lots of different capacities and lots of different qualities. You can go off and get 100 cups of coffee. You can go get 1,000 cups of coffee. You can get the exact kind of coffee, oat soy latte that you want from over at these coffee as a service providers. Even better than the coffee maker I have here. Sure, I think of myself as fairly good at making coffee, not spectacular, but I don't even know how you make an oat soy latte, let alone have the ingredients to do it. Whereas if you go to a specialized provider, they're really good at that kind of thing, and you don't have to be a coffee expert. It's just already built in. That's exactly like the cloud. For years, decades, when we were working in SQL Server, if someone said that they wanted to do one particular thing, and we as data professionals, let's say that someone said they wanted to store files inside the database, we would have a reflexive answer. We would say things like file table or file stream, because that was the only option that was built into the database, or those were the only options that were built into the database. But once you get up to the cloud, and then you go, well, you know what, you really shouldn't be putting files in the database up here. The hotel room coffee is no good. Technically, you can use these options, but you know what you should do instead is you should go to one of these file hosting services that works really well on the cloud side. All of a sudden, it's a whole new world. I mean, there are all kinds of options that are available to you. That brings us to the second way out of 5 that the cloud impacts your career. The second way out of 5 is that there's now a whole data services landscape. And to show you what I mean by that, I'm going to go take a walk over here to the window, and you can join me over there. So I live in downtown San Diego, and if I want a cup of coffee, there are a whole bunch of places where I can go to get one. I can tell you just from looking down here that I know that there's a Starbucks that's like 2 blocks over this way. There's a tiny little hole in the wall that's like right around the corner that makes really good croissants. 2 blocks over, there's another brand new place that's going in that specializes in artisanal stuff. There's another one over there that also serves breakfast sandwiches. It sounds really easy to just go get a cup of coffee, but there's so many choices out there, and the map keeps changing. The businesses out there keep changing, the staff that are there, the quality of product that they have. Sometimes one particular product might be out of stock. They might be out of soy oat lattes materials or whatever it is. The landscape of choices is huge. Well, you know what? It's the same thing when you go to the cloud and you're looking at data services. Say that you want an ETL tool, a tool that will pull data from one source, transform it, and then load it into another service. Well, as you go out there and you look across the landscape, there are all kinds of different tools, and there's not even one consolidated like a Yelp or a Google Maps that gives you a list of what all the different options are. You end up just hitting a search engine saying what's out there for cloud ETL services. And then you go look at things like Gartner in order to find out what tools are available and what their different pros and cons are. The number 2 thing to be aware of about how the cloud impacts your career is that the services that are out there, the landscape map of data services that are out there, whether you're talking about data storage like persistence layers, caching layers, ETL tools, reporting tools, monitoring tools, observability, any kind of tool that you want to use around data, there's an entire landscape map for it. All kinds of different partners and providers competing and offering brand new services all the time. And there's not one great place to go learn all of them. This sucks for you and me. This sucks pretty bad for you and me. The problem with this is that we don't have enough spare time to be experts and memorize all of the different options and the different locations out there. I kind of vaguely sort of remember what Starbucks has in terms of like breakfast sandwiches and my favorite meals to get out there. The tiny hole in the wall place around the corner, I don't even remember what the hole in the wall's place is. I just know that they have really good croissants, and that's what I like to order when I go there. The brand new place that's like 2 doors down, I'm gonna have to go figure out whether or not it's any good. Because of course, if you just go listen to whoever it is, they're gonna say that they're amazing. Every service provider out there will tell you that they're the best. That's effectively advertising. And you and I don't have enough time to learn all of those things, much less judge their quality individually, and yet we are constantly being told that that's our job. We are constantly being told by the very service providers who are trying to win us into the front door, they are telling you, you're going to be a dinosaur if you don't know the menu at this brand new coffee place 2 doors down. Your skills are going to be worthless if you haven't sampled their soy oat latte and whatever breakfast bar it is that they're trying to sell you. It's confusing as a community member, because sometimes what you see that masquerades as training on things like YouTube channels, people's blogs, webcasts, whatever, masquerades as training when it's really advertising, especially when we're talking about brand new cloud services. All these cloud services need to pitch themselves as the best one on the map, and they're all fighting for your attention time. So now this brings us to the next piece. How do you figure out, in terms of your career, where you're going to place your bets? Well, when you step back and you look at that entire map, you look at all the places out there that you could go for coffee, what you have to start by thinking about is, where did your company choose to put their primary databases? If it's the cloud, for example, did they choose their primary hosting partner to be Amazon, Azure, Google, someone else? It's kind of like picking a hotel. If I said my friends were coming over and I was going to put a couple of you up into a hotel, I'm not paying for it. You're paying for your own hotel. Well, let's say that you decide to go to the Hilton. The Hilton is over there. To say you decide to go to the Marriott's over there. To say that you decide to go to the Best Western, that's right down there. I wouldn't actually recommend that. But the place that you choose to go to dictates what coffee shops are nearby. I don't expect you to know all the menus and all the different parts of every component coffee shop everywhere, but when you have a limited amount of time, the place that is currently paying your salary is the place where you start learning their coffee shops, because some data services are physically located closer to certain databases. If you use Azure SQL DB and you're thinking about building a warehouse, well, of course, a data warehouse, it's a little weird when we're talking about physical locations. If your primary database is in Azure SQL DB, then you need to look at the data warehousing offerings that are hosted by Microsoft, because it's going to be in Azure, it's going to be physically nearby. Oh, sure, you could look at Google's data warehousing solutions or Amazon's data warehousing solutions, but it's exactly like if you chose to stay at the Hilton down there, and then you wanted your coffee from this coffee shop over here. If you and your family are at that Hilton down there, and then they give you a whole bunch of coffee orders, and you go, well, you know what? I happen to know the menu at this place right down here. They make fantastic coffee. I'm just gonna go get you your 4 coffees. I'm gonna be right back. And then you take a 20-minute drive or walk down over here to this coffee shop. You get the stuff that you want. You take a 20-minute drive back. Your family's going to be pissed off because everything's going to be cold. It doesn't matter how good it came out over there. You paid extra in order to do these round trips back and forth. That's network latency. And there's cross-cloud expenses too. These cloud providers, when you shuffle data out across their network lines, some of them will charge you an arm and a leg in order to move large quantities of data. So not only is it going to be slow, but you're also going to pay an arm and a leg for it as well. So the place where you choose to host most of your data, that's the part of town where you should focus on learning the database services at, all the extra services, the queuing, the caching, putting files in there, and so forth. This starts to limit how much you need to know. Now, of course, if your company decided to go over there to the Hilton and you're interested in this coffee shop down there, you can learn it. It's just not going to pay off when you're working over here. It might be something that you learn for the future, for another career, for another job that you're going to get at another company somewhere else. Similarly, when this coffee shop comes a-calling, you need to know whether how close it is to the data that the place where your data is stored. When this is happening up in the cloud, you don't say, hey, my data is in Virginia, tell me where your servers are. You start by finding out what cloud partner it's in. You don't bother learning things in Amazon when your company's primary database stuff lives in Microsoft. It just doesn't make sense. There's one job title where it does make sense, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Pricing factors into it, production speed, like how quickly you're going to move data back and forth. These are the rules that you're going to use, the guidelines that you're going to use when you're trying to pick the right data partner for whatever lives closer to where your databases are at. Now, you might be right about now saying, well, but Brent, my company didn't choose to put all their data over in the cloud. My company chose to keep all their data on premises. That's an absolutely legit thing. A lot of companies, just like how I'm talking about here, I didn't move into a hotel. I have an apartment, but I have a hybrid. I have a hybrid in the sense that when people come to stay, when I have unpredictable capacity problems or even predictable capacity problems, when people come to stay, I am probably going to refer them to one specific hotel that I know the best, or I know people at, or I know that part of town. Your company is probably going to do something similar. Even if you're staying 100% on premises, you're probably going to look at the cloud for some of your projects. To figure out which projects, you want to talk to your developers and your middle level managers. You want to say, hey, what cloud services are y'all looking at? Because I guarantee you, no matter what company you're in, there are people inside your company that are looking at cloud-based services today. And I'll give you a great example, GitHub. I don't use GitHub as an example because Microsoft bought them, although I'm glad they did, because I happen to like Microsoft a lot, and I happen to like GitHub a lot. If somebody's going to steward that company, I would kind of like it to be Microsoft. But I use GitHub because it's a good example of something that all kinds of developers need. They need a place to host their source code. And as long as they're hosting the source code there, they also need continuous integration and continuous deployment, which means that they're constantly building their applications over and over again from source code, running tests against them. And when they want to run tests against their applications, what do their applications need? Data. And you're going to have to figure out a database solution that works with your continuous integration and continuous deployment if your stuff is up in the cloud. So starting to work more closely with your developers and asking questions about which cloud services they're using and how you can be involved to help in that part of the work dictates which part of the map you go into. If your developers are interested in continuous integration in GitHub, for example, or continuous deployment with tools related to GitHub, or if they're using whatever the Microsoft Azure deployment tool, they keep renaming the thing, but the Microsoft Azure deployment tool thing, figuring out what database tools are going to work well with that. Now, when you're talking to your developers about the solutions that they're going to use, sometimes that list is enormous because they're not just thinking about making small iterative changes to applications. They're talking about reinventing the application from the ground up and going cloud native. Let's go talk about what that means. So when you hear developers give you a list of tools that they want to use, sometimes you're going to hear developers say things like, we want to rebuild our application as cloud native. And what they mean by that, it's a lot like wanting to live in a hotel. This is not a joke. This is the truth. I have always wanted to live in a hotel ever since I realized that you could live in a hotel and that some people actually do live in hotels. One of the first jobs that I had out of high school was working in hotels. As soon as I found out that that was an option, I was like, that is exactly what I would like to do. I would like to live in a world where I can pick up a phone and call in a housekeeper or call a maintenance person or call dry cleaning in to pick up my clothes. Not all the time. I don't mind cooking for myself every now and then or doing my laundry. I actually kind of like doing my laundry, although I can't do my own dry cleaning. But to have room service available where sometimes you just don't want to get out of bed and you just want someone to bring you eggs and pancakes, or sometimes you just want to have a whole big meal catered in very quickly because you had a few friends over. The concept of living in a hotel sounds awesome right up until you get to the price tag. Then obviously the price tag is why I'm not living in a hotel, and I don't know a whole lot of people who do. But if I could afford to live in a hotel, like if I was dealing with the kind of crazy over-provisioning that we talked about earlier, if I was used to living in a 16-bedroom mansion, it's possible that living in a hotel could actually seem like it's going to save money. Spoiler alert, it almost never saves money. But if you did live in a hotel, there are probably skills that you can't wait to give up and unlearn. If you're like me, I don't ever want to dust a baseboard again. I don't ever want to be down on my hands and knees scrubbing a floor. In this condo, I have not yet figured out how to get stains off of this counter, and it's supposed to be synthetic, and I'm sure that housekeepers know a million tricks to get this stuff right off. There are also skills that I have that I kind of enjoy, but I would probably give up. For example, making coffee. If there was a coffee place down in the lobby that was as good as like a big name brand coffee place, I'd probably just go down some stairs and just get that right away. And then skills that I would probably like to keep, but I would have to give up. Maybe making soup or popcorn. Because in most hotel rooms, there aren't kitchens. They don't allow you to cook things. You have to go down and use the restaurant. You are not allowed to cook for yourself. And there are skills that I don't really want to pick up that I would have to pick up. What if you have a family? I don't, but people who are older than me. I don't have people who are younger than me, but if you had kids, and say that you have a rather large family, let's say you're used to having 4, 5, 6 kids, and you're used to having a 3, 4, 5 bedroom house, well, you're probably not going to find a hotel with 3, 4, 5 bedrooms inside the same unit. Hotels are designed to be modular. Hotels are designed so that you get one room per set of beds. Sometimes you find 2 beds in a hotel room, but it's pretty unusual that you find 3, 4, or 5. That would be really hard for people with a bunch of kids because you're used to being able to just check in on your kids. You're used to being able to hear if they're up to no good. Maybe that was just my parents. But you're used to being able to share some resources, like have a couple of bathrooms that you can share between a whole bunch of kids. You're simply not allowed to do things like that when you live in hotels. All this is exactly the same as how cloud native works. If you decide from the ground up you're going to put your data in Azure SQL DB, you're going to go get your caching from whatever Azure Redis caching service, you're going to go do parallel data processing using the data warehousing piece for Azure. When you decide to use those kinds of services, they come with built-in segmented rules with some things you're just not allowed to change. And they may not be the design rules that you would personally like to live by, but you're giving up control of that in exchange for having automatic scalability, for only paying for what you use, for having someone else manage things, like in a hotel, someone else manages the plumbing problems. Up in Azure or Amazon, Google, someone else manages things like always-on availability groups for you. You don't have to screw around with Windows clustering, for example. So if you're working in a company that's going cloud native, or if you see those flags kind of coming down or signs coming down the pike, that's thing number 4 in how the cloud is going to affect your career. When companies go cloud native, that affects the work that you're doing for that company, for better or worse. The work doesn't go away. Even if you're one of those database jobs that people talk about as a dinosaur, like sometimes you'll hear people say, production database administrator jobs are going away. You still have work to do up in the cloud. It's just going to be different. Provisioning is different. Security management is different. Capacity planning is different. And some parts, like backups, are taken away from you and done by someone who is, frankly, better at it than you are. I kind of like that as a SQL Server person. I like that Microsoft and Amazon and Google are taking away from the parts of the job that I never really liked. I never really liked responding to failed backup messages because we ran out of space. I never really liked dealing with Windows clustering issues because the cluster failed over or somebody reused a network security account. When the vendor does this for you, it just takes away those things so that you don't have to deal with them. And that brings us to number 5, whose jobs are going to get the most affected. The thing in number 5 in how the cloud manages or impacts your career, doesn't manage your career. The 5th way that the cloud kind of impacts your career is that you need to understand what companies are hiring you for and what their future vision looks like. Because ideally you change jobs as few times as possible. And I want you to find a place where you land and what you want to do meshes with what the company wants to do for the next several years. And if you find yourself suddenly out of work, I want you to be able to understand and be aware of the kind of job that you have today versus the kind of job that companies are hiring for going forwards. I like to think of data jobs as being broken up into 3 separate things. There's maintainers, builders, and architects. Maintainers make sure that the lights are on, that the plumbing is running smoothly. They're not building new things. Generally, maintainers are dealing with something large and stable, and something growing and stable in many cases. They don't get selections on, or they don't get to choose many things about the platform that they're working with, because the platform that they're working with isn't changing. The platform is stable. The application is popular enough. It's part of the company's lifeblood, and we got to make sure that this thing remains stable. Maintainers, I'm going to get bad comments for this. Maintainers don't need to look at the cloud yet. Because true maintainers, people who are keeping the lights on, can have a job for the next 10, 20 years, maintaining the same stuff that they're working on today. Okay, look, I know you want me to put my flame-proof pants on now because you want to tell me how wrong I am, but think about something. What's the oldest version of SQL Server that your company runs? For a bunch of us here, it's going to be an old enough version that Microsoft no longer supports it. I'm not happy about that. It sucks. We should all only be running versions of SQL Server that Microsoft actually supports. But I bet over in the closet, you've got some vitally important thing that only runs on a decrepit, smoke-filled version of SQL Server. It's like going into an old Vegas casino and you're like, God, how does anybody breathe in here? It's totally gross and nasty, and you feel like you need to take a shower every time you get near that SQL Server. There are a bunch of old legacy applications, especially at large companies, at big, ginormous companies. Generally, the larger a company is, the more old and decrepit systems that it still has lying around. If you want to be a maintainer, you can blissfully ignore the cloud. Continue. You don't have to change anything about your career. You do have to be aware that the number of companies that you can apply to for a new job will continue to shrink. It's not going to get down to zero, probably not even if you just graduated college and you just got a job doing maintenance. You probably could still just vegetate along doing the same tools that you're using for another 10, 20 years. And the reason why I might argue that you should do that is because if you go learn the cloud today, everything that you're going to learn is going to be outdated within 5 years anyway. The reality of the cloud today is that the freaking documentation can't even keep up. The documentation for the products is often wrong. I can tell you the number of times that Richie and I have tried to work on something and we found things in the documentation that flat out don't agree with how the product actually works. And then you go and file GitHub issues or you talk to people on Twitter about who maintain the tool and they're like, oh yeah, we should get around to updating that. Or my favorite example, the examples inside the product, like in the documentation in the books online, won't even compile. And I'm not talking just about Microsoft. I'm talking about all vendors, especially third-party vendors, smaller ones than Microsoft, where the examples that they give you, here's hello world, don't even work. So, deep calming breaths. So that the labor that you put into learning a system like that is so dramatically immature is wasted unless you think of the benefit as a reason to drink after work. So if you're a maintainer, you could get by for a long time without learning the cloud. Am I saying that that cloud learning time is wasted? No, if you want to get to the point where you're maintaining cloud-based systems, those jobs will grow over time. Right now, those jobs are fairly small. There are way more companies with legacy systems that need maintainers. If you want to be a maintainer, you're best off sticking with older systems. In 5, 10, 15 years, there will be more jobs maintaining outdated legacy applications on Azure SQL. That's just not the case today because its most new development is going into places like that. So I said there were 3 categories of jobs. That first one was maintainer, second one being builder. If you're a builder, the action is in the cloud. Yes, people are absolutely still building applications on premises. People are still building Windows-only applications. They're not building, there are less people building cross-platform applications. Old legacy Windows applications are still a big thing in the Microsoft database community. But the cloud is where it's going. And I can't give you the same advice that I gave the maintainers where I said they'd be stable for 10 or 20 years. You won't. If you're a builder, if you're involved with building new applications, as the hockey great Wayne Gretzky used to say, you want to skate to where the puck is going. If you're playing hockey, you can't skate to where the puck is right now because the puck is moving all over the place as people pass it and it goes rapidly down the ice rink, skating rink, whatever. Listen, I don't do sports ball. I used to do sports ball in college and I dropped out of college. What am I even talking about? High school's what I meant to say. Wayne Gretzky would say that he's skating to where the puck is going is the smart move, and the puck is clearly going to the cloud. Azure SQL, Amazon RDS, Google Cloud SQL. I don't care as much which one you pick or which tertiary data services that you pick, things like queuing services or serverless Lambda type things. AWS Glue, Azure, what do they call Azure Data Factory? It's to so many services, and I'll talk more about that in a second. If you're a builder, you want to specialize in whatever tools that your company has decided to standardize on. Like if you're in the Azure cloud, you learn the Azure tools. If you're in the Amazon cloud, you use their tools. If you're in Google Cloud, you use their tools. Everybody who's in the other clouds is going to make fun at you and point at you. They're going to say that you're missing out on all kinds of stuff. They're lying. Their documentation sucks just as bad as yours does. It has just as many gotchas as yours does. And yours probably has just as many job opportunities as theirs does. That's not really true, but it's hard to see the future in terms of which ones of those is going to win and do really, really well. When you make a bet on a platform, whether it's Amazon or Azure or Google, when you make a bet on a platform, you are limiting the number of jobs that you can get because you're thinking you're betting on one. What's going to happen if you want to get a job at a company that uses the other? Builders, this advice is for builders. Builders, what you do with your resume is that you don't just put the tools that you used. Hear me out. Let's say that I work for a company that chose to go with Microsoft Azure, with Microsoft Azure. And let's say that I'm a production DBA, let's say, and I took 1,000 databases and I moved them all into Azure SQL DB. Here's what that line on my resume looks like. If I only say I have experience moving SQL Server databases into Azure SQL DB, that immediately narrows down the number of companies that I can work for. But if I say, assisted the company with migrating databases to cloud-based databases like Azure SQL DB, Amazon RDS, and Google Cloud SQL, but I make sure to word it in a way that it's clear that I'm saying I chose services like these, or I evaluated between these and helped choose. Your goal is to get all of those keywords onto your resume, because as someone's just scanning through the list of stuff on the resume, they're looking for the tools that they use. Believe you me, they will be happy with someone who used similar tools from another cloud provider. Because it doesn't matter whether you're good at Azure SQL DB or Amazon RDS or Google Cloud SQL. What matters is that you're used to working in the cloud and doing things like command line management with PowerShell or with a portal. Hopefully not with a portal. Hopefully you're moving towards command line management. Because if you learn how to manage and deploy and secure and performance tune one of the cloud-based SQL platforms, you will do fine on the others. They're close enough, and you're going to have other team members who can help you out. Your goal is to get into the interview so that you can say, yes, the company that I worked for chose to use Microsoft Azure SQL DB. It's very similar to Amazon RDS. Here are the ways that it is similar to RDS. I understand that y'all use Amazon RDS. Here's the experience that I have in Azure SQL DB that directly translates over to Amazon RDS. They're not different tools. Just like if you go order coffee from somewhere and you order a soy oat latte from Starbucks, you're just as capable of looking at any other coffee shop's menu, figuring out whether they have a soy oat latte, figuring out how close it is to your own data center, figuring out the quality of the thing it is that you're drinking, figuring out when it's curdled or spoiled and when you need to go back and get another one. The mechanics of getting a coffee are pretty much the same no matter which coffee shop you go to. Similarly, the mechanics of deploying and managing SQL servers are pretty much the same regardless of which cloud provider that you choose. Yes, the syntax is going to be wildly different. Yes, the performance configuration is going to be wildly different. But you know what? It's true with every cloud provider every year. Every year, I swear on all that's holy, I think that they just take all the pages in their portal, they throw them up in the air, and then they go see where they land, and they call that the next version, and they think that that's going to be better. I said that there were three kinds of jobs, and I mentioned maintainers and builders. Let's talk about the third one. The third one is architects. And for architects, we're going to go back to the window. So the third job type being architects, you kind of think of as a human Yelp reviewer. Well, not reviewer, but someone who knows all of the Yelp reviews forwards and backwards for all of the coffee shops that are available in the entire town. But in reality, of course, no one can possibly know all of them forwards and backwards because the business map just keeps changing here. New coffee spots come and go, and you can't really know the pros and cons of every single one of them. And thankfully, in the real world, when we're talking about coffee, it doesn't really matter because you can just go hit Google and find an accurate Yelp or, well, kind of vaguely accurate reviews of coffee shop places. But that's not how the cloud data services landscape goes. When you Google for things or Bing for things, you end up finding all kinds of weirdo, oddball, outdated things that don't really tell you the gotchas of each individual partner. So as an architect, what you really have to do is you have to focus on the one part of town, whether it's Azure or Amazon or Google, you have to focus on the one part of town where you can really know things forwards and backwards. And then it's not enough to just read whatever the vendor says. You also have to continuously talk to people who are adopting the different cloud services that you're looking at working with. Because all of these cloud providers are bringing out data services, and all of their partners are bringing out data services willy-nilly, and you have to constantly keep in touch of what's getting better or worse. Because you can't trust the documentation and you have to talk to people, you also can't trust case studies, because case studies tend to be biased as well. If you get the opportunity to talk to the people who are involved in the case studies, what you have to do is ask questions like, what are you looking for in the next version of whatever this API or tool is? What are the parts that you struggle with the most frequently? What are the parts where you've had to build manual workarounds? What are the walls that you've hit? Because that's really where the truth is all about. Then you have to talk to your own internal teams. Once you've recommended a solution and they've started going off and building it, the builders you have to stay in touch with on your own team to constantly make sure that you're on the right product path. And even as you're building things, even as your team is building things, stuff gets deprecated up in the cloud much more than it ever has in the past. There's a Twitter account just dedicated to keeping track of everything that Microsoft Azure deprecates. It's hard work staying on top of the announcements, both on the new products as well as the ones fading off. So what we talked about inside of here, the 5 ways that the cloud impacts your career. Number 1, the real reason that the cloud became on fire in terms of adoption is that we sucked for capacity planning. We either over-provisioned everything or under-provisioned everything, and the company either ended up spending way too much money for stuff we didn't actually use, like dedicated bathrooms for every guest in the house ×2 for redundancy, or else we under-provisioned and then we weren't able to handle peak workloads. The cloud purports to handle that by automatically scaling, and it works to different extents depending on which service you're using. Not all of the services perform the same. The second way that the cloud impacts your job is that there's a huge data services landscape. No one person can know all of the components of all of the clouds out there, and they keep changing constantly. There are tons of hidden gotchas, off the menu specials. So just like if you wanted to find a coffee shop that has your favorite coffee beverage just done the way that you like it, it's not enough to see that it's on the menu. You may actually have to go and make sure they can do it correctly and that it's available on the hours and times when you want it. So because you can't know this whole entire landscape, number 3 way that the cloud is influencing your career is you have to look at the parts of town where your company has chosen to live. If your company chose to host most of their production data in Amazon, you learn the Amazon cloud data services. If they chose to live in the Azure world, you live in the Azure database services. Google, you go to learn their database services. And then when it's outside third company partners, you have to ask what's available in which cloud and how much it's going to cost you to drag your data back and forth between those cloud providers. If, like a lot of companies, your company has chosen to keep their databases exactly where they are, like on premises or in a colo facility, you want to start talking to developers and middle managers on your team about cloud projects coming down the pike. Because even though your primary databases might just be in one cloud partner, you might have one-off data science projects or ETL projects that are temporarily using the cloud in order to handle that unpredictable bursting, like when 10 friends of yours come over and want to crash at your place. You don't have 10 extra bedrooms, so you use a hotel. Your company doesn't have enough servers to do one-off big data science projects, so they temporarily provision stuff in a cloud. The more you can be aware of where your company is doing these experiments, it'll help you to learn which parts of which clouds you want to learn next for your career. Number 4 way that the cloud is influencing your career is that some companies are choosing to do big, huge experiments or rewrites by going cloud native, which is kind of like packing up all your stuff and deciding to live in a hotel. When that happens, that changes everything about how you work. It changes which services you use. It changes the way that you use databases, the way you provision them, the way that you do performance tuning. Job descriptions for people who are doing cloud native work tend to look completely different, and they'll usually have the words cloud native in them. For people in that category, people who are going towards cloud native type work, it's much less about having experience with particular coffee shops. It's more about having experience with any coffee shop and jumping around from one to the next, because your company is going to need you to rewrite big, huge pieces of software or processes. And then finally, number 5 is when the cloud is involved, understand what companies are hiring you for. Companies are generally either hiring you to be a maintainer, a builder, or an architect. Maintainers tend to work on more legacy systems with very slow change rates. Maintainers doesn't really pay much to learn the cloud today unless you want a different kind of maintainer job, because most legacy stuff isn't in the cloud yet, or even when it goes to the cloud, it's a simple matter of lift and shift. You're dropping that SQL Server database exactly as it is, just somewhere else in a different cloud VM. If you're a builder, you're going to need to know the part of town that your company chose to build in, that your architects chose to standardize on. And then you're going to have to learn those cloud services. But beyond that, when you go to look for your next builder job, it's important that in your resume, you list all of the similar coffee shops so that you can say, we took a legacy application, made it cloud native by choosing between Azure SQL DB, Amazon RDS, and Google Cloud SQL. And then after we'd chosen, we did a migration using tools like, and you list them. So that way you can get past the keyword filters that recruiters usually use. And when it comes time to sit down for the actual interview, you'll be able to say that the company that you were working for chose this particular cloud service. Here are the kinds of things that you learned, and here's why that's applicable to all of the cloud services, because generally speaking, it is. And then finally, if you're an architect, you can't expect to get hired as an architect for companies in any part of the town. You're going to have to pick one particular cloud provider, focus on learning that really well, and there are risks with tying your reputation and your future to one particular cloud provider, but overall the cloud providers are going to be fine. They're all going to be around. It just limits your careers a little bit because you're picking just one of them to work on. But there are jobs, especially data jobs, in architecting across all of these. We're really lucky. As data professionals in the year 2021, there is so much work out there. And the hardest thing that you have today is choosing where to focus your time and invest your training money. Like, every hour of your day, where are you going to focus it in order to get the best bang for your career buck moving forwards? As you look at the huge number of sessions even left today in the past Data Community Summit, take a few moments to think about which ones are in the right part of town based on what your company is using today. Don't get distracted just because some coffee shop wants you to come in and try their fresh lattes. Make sure that it's related to what your company is doing today, and that'll give you the best leg forward in long term. Thanks a lot for hanging out with me in the last hour. I hope you had a great time. I'm answering questions over in the chat, and hopefully I'll see you again in person at an upcoming summit where we can all hang out and get together. And until then, please stay safe, take care of the ones you love, and just stay safe and healthy so that I can see you again next time. Adios, y'all.